Imagine the global economy as a massive, intricate machine running at maximum capacity. But the power cord is plugged into a socket resting right on the edge of a cliff. For the past few months, we have all been watching that cord slip, millimeter by millimeter. We are, of course, talking about the explosive situation in the Middle East. But just when it felt like the machine was about to be unplugged completely, someone hit the pause button.
A very fragile, highly conditional pause button. It really feels like the world collectively exhaled a breath it didn't even realize it was holding. But an exhalation isn't a resolution. What we are looking at is a 14-day countdown. 2 weeks to pull the cord back from the edge, or 2 weeks to simply reload and recalibrate before the next escalation.
Exactly. Let us break down exactly what happened because the optics of this are just as fascinating as the geopolitical reality. Just hours before a self-imposed evening deadline, the announcement drops not through a traditional White House press briefing, but via a social media post. A declaration that offensive military operations and bombing campaigns against Iran are being suspended. But the phrasing used was very specific. It was framed as a double-sided ceasefire.
Which is a brilliant piece of diplomatic framing when you think about it. By calling it double-sided, it implies a mutual stepping back from the brink, even though the core of the announcement was a list of very strict demands. It is the classic art of declaring victory while simultaneously asking for terms. The statement explicitly claimed that all military objectives had already been met and exceeded. That is a fascinating psychological tactic. It gives the domestic audience a sense of total triumph, which then creates the political cover necessary to actually sit down at a negotiating table without looking weak.
It is the ultimate face-saving off-ramp. You declare you have won, so you no longer need to fight. But the pause is not a gift. It has a massive price tag attached. The entire suspension of hostilities hinges on one geographic bottleneck, the Strait of Hormuz.
The global jugular vein. It is almost absurd when you step back and look at it philosophically. We live in an era of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and space exploration, yet the stability of the entire modern world still relies on a narrow strip of water barely 20 miles wide. Roughly 20% of the world's oil flows through that strait. When that waterway gets choked, the economic pain is immediate and universal. We have already seen energy markets panicking and supply chains buckling. The central condition of this ceasefire is that the strait must be completely and safely reopened for commercial navigation.
And what is genuinely surprising to many observers is how quickly the other side agreed to that condition. You might expect a long, drawn-out haggling process, but the response was almost immediate. The Foreign Ministry confirmed that if the strikes halt, they will coordinate safe passage. Their Supreme National Security Council actually accepted the framework of this 2-week window. Why fold on the strait so quickly? Is it just the sheer weight of the military pressure they have been under?
Military pressure is absolutely a massive factor. They have absorbed hundreds of strikes targeting highly sensitive infrastructure. But there is also a deeper economic calculus at play. Closing the strait is a doomsday weapon. It hurts the adversaries, yes, but it also isolates the country, enforcing the closure, alienating potential allies and trading partners who rely on that same oil. By agreeing to open it, they instantly relieve global market anxiety, which ironically casts them in a somewhat cooperative light on the world stage just days before negotiations. It is a highly calculated trade. We give you back the global economy, you give us a reprieve from the bombs.
It is transactional diplomacy in its purest form. And that brings us to the actual mechanics of what happens next. A ceasefire is just an empty room. Diplomacy is what furnishes it. And the location chosen for this diplomatic furnishing is Islamabad. Pakistan stepping in to mediate this is a massive shift in the usual diplomatic playbook. We usually see European nations or perhaps Gulf states playing this role.
It is a remarkable pivot. It highlights a changing multipolar reality. Pakistan has unique leverage and historical ties that bridge certain divides Western nations simply cannot cross. The involvement of their top civilian and military leadership in brokering this pause adds a layer of regional gravity. It keeps the problem and the solution grounded in the broader neighborhood rather than being dictated entirely from a Western capital.
And what they are discussing in Islamabad isn't just a vague concept of peace. There is an actual document on the table. A 10-point proposal submitted by Iran, which was publicly acknowledged as a workable basis for negotiation. That phrase, workable basis, is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It is doing astronomical amounts of heavy lifting. A month ago, the rhetoric was apocalyptic. Now, we are talking about a workable basis for long-term peace. But let us not be naive about what that 10-point plan likely contains. It will be a maximalist document. It will demand sanctions relief, security guarantees, and regional autonomy. The other side will counter with demands for total transparency, dismantling of certain capabilities, and strict enforcement mechanisms. The gap between those two positions is an ocean. But the fact that they are willing to build a bridge over that ocean, rather than just firing missiles across it, is the real story here.
But here is the terrifying caveat to all of this optimism. This is a bilateral pause. It involves two primary actors, but this is a theater with a massive ensemble cast. Even after this announcement, we are still seeing isolated strikes from allied nations in the region. The ecosystem of this conflict is so deeply entangled. How do you maintain a ceasefire when third parties are still actively engaging?
You have just identified the tripwire. This is why I hesitate to use the word peace. Peace is a systemic condition. What we have right now is a localized anesthetic. The broader infection is still raging. If a third-party strike hits a sensitive target, or if a rogue faction decides they do not recognize the Islamabad talks and launches a drone at a commercial tanker in the Strait, the entire 2-week framework collapses instantly. The trust deficit is absolute. Every radar blip, every misconstrued statement, every delayed ship in the Strait could be interpreted as a violation of the terms.
It really forces you to think about the incredible fragility of our global systems. We build these massive interconnected economies. We promise our citizens stability. Yet, we allow the foundation of that stability to rest on the whims of geopolitical brinkmanship. The cost of this conflict isn't just measured in the tragic loss of life or the destruction of infrastructure. It is measured in the psychological toll on the entire planet. The constant anxiety of wondering if tomorrow is the day the oil stops flowing, or the day a regional war goes global.
That is the hidden tax of modern geopolitics. We are all paying for this instability, whether we realize it or not. It is baked into the price of everything we buy, the inflation we suffer, and the general sense of dread that permeates the news cycle. This 2-week pause is a rare moment where leaders have looked over the edge of the abyss and mutually decided to take one step back. But stepping back from the edge doesn't mean you have left the cliff.
Exactly. You are still standing on the mountain. So, as we look toward these Friday talks in Islamabad, what is the metric for success? If a comprehensive peace treaty is impossible in 14 days, what does a victory actually look like when this timer runs out?
Victory in 2 weeks is simply an extension of the timer. It is the establishment of a working group. It is a mutual agreement to keep the Strait open for another 30 days while talks continue. Diplomacy at this level is rarely about grand, sweeping signatures on parchment. It is about incremental de-escalation. It is about making the cost of returning to war slightly higher than the cost of staying at the table. If they can walk out of Islamabad with a framework to keep talking, that is a monumental win.
It is a sobering thought. The best we can hope for is just more time. But right now, time is the most valuable commodity on Earth. The clock is ticking down on these 336 hours. The Strait is slowly unclogging. The diplomats are gathering their briefing binders, and the world is waiting to see if this is the beginning of the end of the conflict or merely the eye of the hurricane. We will be watching closely as the talks unfold. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the forces shaping our world. Keep questioning the headlines, and we will be back to decode the next move on the global chessboard.